Well, hello again, everybody. This is Jeff Adler, continuing my video series, Why I'm Right 2.0. It's been been a while since my last video, but thought I'd jump back into it. And during a little bit of an important time in our country's current events right now, with chapter 26, and what I want to talk about today is relevant to some current events, but also, of course, more macro politics, the philosophies behind the politics, as I usually do. For those who are new to the video series, there are 25 other chapters on YouTube and on my Facebook page, which is Why I'm Right, based on the Why I'm Right book that I wrote a few years ago. In fact, this particular chapter may be enough meat on its bones that might produce another political book. I have to wait and see, but I'm thinking about it. To begin with, a lot of times when I get into debates, which isn't often, but with the people from the other side of the aisle, as it were, left-wingers, they harp on a certain aspect of conservative belief, which is our desire to hearken back to a time in the past to find things that we like. And we like to think about how things used to be, and of course, what they're missing, of course, as conservatives, we tend to do that simply because A, we actually know history unlike them, and B, we can do comparative histories and how things were versus how they are, which they are unwilling to do because they don't understand history and they live for today and for tomorrow, and the past is irrelevant to them. But more to the point, we are hearkening back to a time when things were better on many fronts. And of course, the liberals' response to this is, well, why would you want to go back to a time when there was slavery, or back to a time when there was segregation, or back to a time when there was all this racism, or back to a time when women weren't treated the same and didn't have opportunities, and this and that and the other thing, and that. Of course, they completely missed the point, or they purposely missed the point, which is more probable. We're not advocating going back to relive all that glory, much of which, of course, came from them, not us. No, we're hearkening back to when there was a time prior to our current culture, when at that time, and going all the way back to the beginning, Americans had a certain connection to one another. And that connection was founded or based on certain principles, certain American cultural founding principles, first principles, certain understandings, certain beliefs, certain agreements with regards to morals, behavior, taboos, and the rest. And we lament the loss of much of that existed prior to the current culture, which basically, as I mentioned before, threw the baby out with the bathwater. It took all the good and all the bad in order to make hasty change. And we are hearkening back to a time when we could reach across the aisle. We could get along with one another. We weren't so diverse or divisive and so polarized in what we're seeing today. Is it worse today? I think it is. Now, it's been bad in the past. It's up and down. It goes through cycles. But I mean as a straight, steady, and in a certain direction, getting worse all the time. It's worse today. Now, part of the conservative philosophy about change, which is what's caused a lot of this, is steady, slow, evolutionary. We believe that we want to conserve that which works and slowly change that which doesn't. We want to analyze it. We want to study it. We want to use our brains. We want to understand its cause and consequence before we just implement something. The liberals have no interest and no patience. The progressives are blind, forward, bully, push, get it done. Don't care what happens. Don't care who gets hurt. Don't care what's ruined in the process. What traditions, what institutions, what mores are destroyed, are unrecognizable after they're done, couldn't care less. And so you get this hasty change. You get this typical Democrat overreach, where they go too far, they take too much, it costs too much, it's the wrong thing at the wrong time, and we're all the worse for it. So you have two distinct philosophical differences. Slow, deliberate change that makes sense. Silly, crazy, balls to the wall change that ends up making no sense. In the end of the day, most conservatives would say this: if you went back 60 years to the beginning of the change of the takeover, I should say, of the culture by the progressives, the radicals, the liberals, and you did nothing. In other words, the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives were not involved in their hasty change, but rather we were stayed on the same course we were throughout the 40s and 50s. For instance, slow change, deliberate change, we would be better off today. All things would be better off today. Minorities, women, the culture, how we get along, by just letting it happen organically, naturally, evolutionarily, instead of the forced, do-gooder, good-intentioned way as we work our way down the path to hell. Now, I don't like to talk in extremes, as you know. I don't like people who do. And that becomes hypocritical if I'm caught doing it, because I think that Democrats and progressives talk in extremes all the time. It's all or nothing for them in many ways. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that progressives and radicals, well, radicals maybe, but progressives and liberals have offered nothing to the country. They've had a lot of good ideas that got implemented and made certain necessary changes in our country. The problem is not the ideas per se, although some of their ideas are absolutely ridiculous. In fact, most of them are. Every now and then, they hit upon an idea that, might have some merit. Hey, even a broken clock is correct twice a day. Even a blind squirrel can find a nut every now and then. But that's where their abilities stop. As Dirty Harry once said, a man's got to know his limitations. Well, the progressives have got to know their limitations. Their limitations end at the ideas, most of which are crap anyway. What they're really, really bad at is implementation. And every time they want to implement their own ideas, stuff goes bad. Things go wrong. So they should never be allowed anywhere near the controls. They should not be driving it, hitting the gas. They should be nowhere near the vehicle at all. They should have come up with the idea of the vehicle and let other people drive it. Right? You got the guy who invents the race car and you got the driver of the race car. They're rarely the same person, almost never. Different skill sets. Progressives have really, really, really bad skill sets with regard to implementation. In fact, they don't have that skill set at all. And we're seeing the end result of that today. Now, the divisiveness in the party and the polarization in the party, some would argue, is worse today because, I would say some on the left would argue, if not all on the left would argue, is because the right wing of the political spectrum has gotten more radical, more right wing. Now, there may be some elements in our culture that are more right wing. Most of them are actually misidentified, even by themselves. As I said in a previous video, even the right wing, like the alt-right people, they're not right wing, they're progressive, they just don't know it. Anything fascist is left wing. We've proven that 1,000 different ways from Sunday. So it only seems like the right wing is getting more uppity, except that most of them aren't right wing. Whatever is the case out there, I can only go by myself. And I think back to myself in my 20s. Some 30 years ago, I was, just starting to understand politics. And even though I had a strong feeling that I was right wing and I was a Republican and I had certain core beliefs, it was starting to coalesce, it was starting to gel, it was starting to make sense, it was starting to become something I could express. And I think back about what I thought then and what I think now. And you know what? It's pretty much the same. There's almost no difference in what I feel about the culture, military, social ideas, abortion, name the subject. Now you might say, well, you haven't learned anything. You haven't expanded your mind. You haven't, no. When you're involved in politics like me, when you're listening to what's going on today, you hear all sides. I've not shut myself off. One does not have to listen or watch fake news CNN to understand that fake news CNN has an opinion and that you're going to hear it. You can't avoid hearing it. If you only listen to right-wing talk radio, they're going to play what the idiots on CNN are playing or saying. Oh, I hear it. Trust me. I know it. I watching the hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. You hear it. You know what's going on. I know what's going on. And they every day reconfirm my values and reconfirm my position. Strengthen it, harden it, make me more determined. I'm not closed-minded, meaning I'm not closed off. I've made up my mind about certain things, and that's never going to change, but I'm not shut off. I'm not out of touch. And so the fact I haven't changed much of my mind in 30 years simply means that I'm not more right-wing. I'm not further to the right somehow. But I can tell you this, I strongly believe that the left is further to the left. Now, why do I say that? Well, when I was young, the Democrat Party was a bigger tent than they are today. And historically, the Democrat Party, theoretically anyway, at least the face that they wanted to show you, or the mask that they wanted to show you, was a party for the little guy, the working man and woman. They were the party for minorities, theoretically. They were the party of, they were just as patriotic and just as aware and protective of things American as Americans, being Americans. And although sometimes their actions belied this mask, they certainly put that mask out for all to see. Their actual actions belied that all the time. But there were certain things you could actually reach across the aisle on and shake their hand in agreement with. There were certain morals, certain things you did and didn't do, certain taboos you didn't cross, certain lines. There's certain, things about America that was sacred. Certain patriotic, deep felt beliefs that's shared by all Americans, most Americans. And the Democrat Party had room for all sorts of people in it. They had your progressives, sure. There was a small little contingent on the far left of the Democrat Party for radicalism, accept it or no. But most of the party was bigger tent. They could accept people like Democrats who were very moderate, almost conservative in a way, like Scoop Jackson or Zell Miller, or even more recently, Joseph Lieberman, who was a very pro-Israel, pro-military kind of guy with a lot of liberal social ideas. There's no room for those people in the Democrat Party. They don't exist in the Democrat Party anymore. The Republican Party, however, is full of moderates. John McCain was a moderate. Jeff Flake, Susan Collins. I mean, there's just to name three. They're all over the place. You got the establishment Democrats who are battling out with the pro-Trumpers. The ones that want to hold on to power. And the pro-Trumpers got put into the power so they can remind the establishment people what they're supposed to be standing for. And they lost their way a little bit, perhaps. But they're all part of a very large tent that used to be a party that was somewhat small tent in many ways. But no party was more tolerant of ideas and people than the Republican Party since its inception, as we've proven when we talk about the history of the two parties. But the perception in the last 60 years, since the Democrats have taken over the culture, has been the opposite. But what I see now, the big tent party is the Republicans. The small tent party is the Democrats, and getting smaller. I mean, we're talking a little teeny umbrella now. That's what you can fit under there. If you don't toe the line, you're gone. If you're a up-and-coming Democrat and you want a federal, national position in Congress, if you don't hold to the same small-minded, narrow-focused beliefs in the Democrat playbook, you don't get money from the DNC to get your election. And if you somehow get elected anyway, despite that, you get marginalized, you get ostracized within Congress. You don't get juicy committee placements. You don't get invited to the cocktail parties. You don't get to be part of the Democrat established block of progressive push forward that you may have wanted to be to join. You are out. There's no room for you. Look what they did to the Democrats who didn't vote the way they were supposed to vote. Treated like absolute animals as a result by fellow Democrats. So the Democrat Party not only is very, very narrow and intolerant and small-minded, small-tented today, but they have also been radicalized and have been taken over by the progressive and radical elements within their party. And we'll talk about that and some more things leading up to the whole point of this video in the next part. See you then.